I never thought I'd be the villain of my own story. I spent years believing I was a good person, the kind of man who held doors open, who remembered anniversaries, who called his mother every Sunday. But I'm here now, sitting in an apartment that echoes with silence, finally ready to tell the truth about what I did, about how I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me, and how the consequences found me in ways I never could have imagined. My name is Marcus, and 3 years ago I cheated on my girlfriend with her best friend, and not a single day has passed since where I haven't carried the weight of that betrayal, like a stone, lodged permanently in my chest. I need you to understand something before I continue. I'm not telling you this story to ask for sympathy. I don't deserve it. I'm not here to justify what I did, because there is no justification. I'm telling you this, because the truth has a way of demanding to be spoken, and because somewhere out there, someone might be standing at the edge of the same cliff I threw myself off of. Maybe my confession can stop them from jumping. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not of the affair, but of everything. Because to understand how I became capable of such profound betrayal, you need to understand who I was, who she was, and the life we had built together. Her name was Sophie Chen. We met at a marketing conference in Chicago when I was 26 years old. I was working for a mid-sized agency in London at the time, and she was there representing a tech startup from San Francisco. I noticed her across a crowded exhibition hall, not because she was the most beautiful woman in the room, though she was beautiful. I noticed her because she was laughing. Real laughter, the kind that comes from deep in your belly and makes everyone around you want to know what's so funny. I found an excuse to introduce myself. Something about the presentation she'd just given on brand authenticity in the digital age. She saw right through me, of course. Sophie always could read people like they were written in large print. But she let me buy her coffee anyway, and by the end of that conference, I knew I'd met someone who was going to change my life. We did long distance for 8 months. London to San Francisco. Flights, video calls, messages that arrived at impossible hours, because neither of us could wait for reasonable time zones. I fell in love with her during those months, with her intelligence, her ambition, her way of making everyone around her feel seen and valued. When she finally agreed to move to London to be with me, I felt like I'd won the lottery. We found a flat in Islington, a proper grown-up apartment with a spare bedroom we called an office and a balcony where we'd drink wine and watch the city lights. Sophie transferred to her company's London branch, and I continued climbing the ladder at my agency. We talked about marriage, about children, about growing old together. I meant every word. For 3 years we were happy. Genuinely, completely happy. The kind of happiness that makes you forget that pain exists, that makes you believe you've somehow figured out the secret that everyone else is still searching for. And then, Rachel came back. Rachel Davies had been Sophie's best friend since university. They'd met during Freshers' Week at Bristol, 2 nervous 18-year-olds who happened to be assigned rooms next door to each other in halls. Their friendship had survived everything. Different career paths, different cities. Sophie's move to America, and eventually, Sophie's moved back to London to be with me. I'd met Rachel several times over the years. She'd been at dinner parties, weekend brunches, Sophie's 30th birthday celebration. She was attractive, tall, dark-haired, with sharp features and an intensity that made you feel like every word she said was important. But she was Sophie's friend, and I never thought about her as anything other than that. Rachel had been living in Dubai, working for a luxury real estate development company. When her company opened a London office, she was the obvious choice to run it. Sophie was overjoyed. Her best friend, finally in the same city after years of long-distance friendship. I was happy for her too, at first. Rachel started coming around more often. Sunday lunches, Friday evening drinks, random Tuesday dinners when Sophie texted me to say Rachel was having a tough day at work and needed company. I welcomed it, initially. I liked seeing Sophie with her friend. She laughed more, relaxed more, became even more of the person I'd fallen in love with. But something started to shift. It was subtle at first. so subtle that I didn't recognize it for what it was. Rachel would find reasons to sit next to me instead of Sophie. Her eyes would linger on mine just a moment too long during conversations. She'd find excuses to touch my arm, my shoulder, to lean in close when she was telling a story. I should have said something. That's the first of 100 moments where I should have made a different choice. I should have told Sophie that her friend was making me uncomfortable, that something felt off. But I didn't, because telling myself I was imagining things was easier. Because part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, liked the attention. You see, something had been happening in my relationship with Sophie that I hadn't fully processed. After 3 years together, the initial electricity had faded into something comfortable, something warm, but not burning. Sophie worked long hours, and so did I. We were building careers, building a future, but sometimes weeks would go by where we barely had a real conversation, where we'd pass each other like ships in the night, sharing a bed, but not much else. I didn't recognize the danger in that distance. I should have. I should have fought to close the gap, should have planned romantic dinners and weekend getaways, and all the things that keep love from becoming mere routine. Instead, I let the distance grow, telling myself it was temporary, that we'd reconnect when work calmed down. And into that distance stepped Rachel. The first time something explicitly crossed a line was at a work event of mine. The agency was celebrating winning a major account, and partners were invited. Sophie was meant to come, but she got pulled into an emergency at her office. Some crisis with a product launch that required all hands on deck. I was disappointed, but I understood. These things happened. Rachel happened to text me that evening. She was bored, she said, and wondered if I wanted to grab a drink. Without thinking too carefully about it, I invited her to the work party instead. A last-minute replacement, I told myself. Nothing more. She arrived looking stunning in a black dress that I tried not to notice. We drank champagne and talked about work, about London, about nothing and everything. My colleagues assumed she was Sophie. I didn't correct them, which was its own kind of betrayal, now that I think about it. At the end of the night, we shared a taxi home, since she lived only a few streets from me. When the car stopped outside her building, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know," she said, "Sophie's really lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," I replied, which was true. "No," Rachel said, her voice dropping lower. "She's lucky. She just doesn't appreciate what she has." And then she leaned in and kissed me. It lasted maybe 2 seconds before I pulled away. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Rachel, I can't..." "Sophie, I know," she said, already opening the door. "I'm sorry. Forget it happened." She was gone before I could respond, disappearing into her building without looking back. I sat in that taxi, frozen. The driver had to ask me twice for directions to my flat. When I finally got home, Sophie was already asleep, her laptop still open beside her, evidence of the crisis that had kept her from the party. I should have told her then. I should have woken her up and confessed what had happened, explained that her best friend had crossed the line and that we needed to talk about it. But I didn't. I told myself it was nothing, that Rachel had been drunk, that addressing it would only cause pain and drama over something that would never happen again. That was the second moment I should have made a different choice. The second in a chain of 100. But the thing about secrets is that they grow in the dark. They feed on silence and rationalization and all the little lies we tell ourselves to avoid confronting the truth. And Rachel's kiss didn't disappear from my mind. It lodged itself there, replaying at unexpected moments. When Sophie was distracted by her phone, when we went days without being intimate, when I lay awake at night feeling lonely in a bed we shared, Rachel acted as though nothing had happened. The next time I saw her at a dinner at our flat, she was her usual self, friendly, witty, fully focused on Sophie. She didn't give me any special looks, didn't try to get me alone. Part of me was relieved. Another part, a part I'm ashamed of, was disappointed. Weeks passed. Things with Sophie continued in their comfortable but distant pattern. I told myself I was satisfied that what we had was good enough, that the passion of early love couldn't be sustained forever. And then Rachel texted me directly for the first time since that night. "Can we talk? Just want to clear the air about what happened." I should have ignored it. I should have shown Sophie and let her deal with her own friend. But instead, I agreed to meet Rachel for coffee. Publicly, I told myself, just to set clear boundaries. We met at a cafe near my office. Neutral territory. Rachel apologized profusely for the kiss. She'd been lonely, she said. Dubai had been isolating, and coming back to London, seeing Sophie so happy, so settled, it had stirred up complicated feelings. She wasn't proud of herself. She hoped I could forgive her. I forgave her. Of course I did. Because forgiving her was easier than examining why I'd thought about that kiss every day since it happened. That should have been the end. Another door that should have closed, but didn't. Instead, that coffee turned into a habit. Rachel worked near my office, and we'd grab lunch sometimes. Just as friends, just catching up. Just two people who happened to be in the same area at the same time. I told Sophie about these lunches. Not all of them, but some. Enough to feel like I wasn't lying. Except I was lying. Every time I sat across from Rachel and felt that electric current running between us, I was lying. Every time I laughed a little too hard at her jokes, dressed a little more carefully when I knew I'd see her, thought about her when I should have been thinking about Sophie, I was lying. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable. I convinced myself that what was happening was innocent, that you couldn't be blamed for feelings, only actions, that as long as nothing physical happened, I wasn't betraying anyone. But emotional affairs are still affairs. I understand that now, though I didn't then. The night it finally happened, the night I crossed the one line I swore I never would, Sophie was away at a conference in Edinburgh. She'd been gone for 3 days and would be gone for 2 more. We'd barely spoken, just perfunctory check-in text between her sessions and my meetings. Rachel invited me to her flat for dinner. She was testing a new recipe, she said, and needed a guinea pig. Sophie was her usual taste tester. But since Sophie wasn't available, I knew what I was walking into. On some level, I knew. But I went anyway, bringing a bottle of wine and all my carefully constructed excuses. The dinner was lovely. The wine flowed freely. We talked about our lives, our dreams, our disappointments. Rachel opened up about her failed engagement in Dubai. A man who'd promised her everything and delivered nothing. I found myself complaining about Sophie, about her workaholic tendencies, about the distance between us, about feeling invisible in my own relationship. "She doesn't see you," Rachel said, her hand finding mine across the table. "I see you, Marcus." And God help me, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Because being seen, being desired, being wanted, these are powerful drugs. And I was already addicted. I could describe what happened next, but you don't need the details. You already know. One thing led to another. And by morning, I had done the one thing I swore I would never do. I had betrayed Sophie. I had slept with her best friend. The guilt hit me before I even left Rachel's flat. It crashed over me like a wave, cold and suffocating. I looked at her sleeping beside me and felt sick to my stomach. What had I done? What kind of person was I? I left before she woke up. I went home, showered for an hour, and tried to scrub away the evidence of my crime. But guilt isn't that easy to wash off. It sinks into your bones, your blood, the very core of who you are. Sophie came home 2 days later, full of stories from her conference, excited about new contacts she'd made and ideas she wanted to implement. She kissed me at the door, and I flinched. Actually, physically flinched. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just tired," I said. The first of many lies I would tell. I swore to myself it wouldn't happen again. One terrible mistake, but just one. I would bury it, move forward, recommit to my relationship with Sophie. I would be a better boyfriend, a more attentive partner, the man she deserved. For 2 weeks, I almost convinced myself I could do it. I planned romantic dinners, came home early, initiated conversations about our future. Sophie seemed surprised, but pleased. Maybe this was the wake-up call I'd needed, I told myself. Maybe something good could come from this horrible thing. But then Rachel texted, and I answered. And then she suggested we meet. And I agreed. And then we were in her flat again. And everything I'd promised myself dissolved like sugar and water. It's hard to explain how quickly I fell into the affair, how completely it consumed me. Within a month, Rachel and I were seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week. We'd meet during lunch breaks, after work, on weekends when Sophie was busy. We developed an elaborate system of lies, cover stories, alibis, ways to explain my absences that Sophie never thought to question because she trusted me. That trust was the worst part. Every time Sophie looked at me with those open, honest eyes, I felt the knife of my betrayal twist a little deeper, but not deep enough to stop. Never deep enough to stop. I told myself it was love, that what I felt for Rachel was real, was powerful, was something I couldn't control. But now, with years of distance and mountains of regret, I can see it for what it actually was. Selfishness, pure and simple. I was a man who wanted to have everything without paying the price for anything. I wanted Sophie's love and stability, and I wanted Rachel's passion and excitement. I wanted the comfort of a committed relationship and the thrill of something forbidden. What I didn't understand, what I refused to understand, was that you can't have both. The universe doesn't work that way. The bill always comes due. The affair continued for nearly 4 months. 4 months of lies, of stolen moments, of living a double life that left me exhausted and exhilarated and terrified all at once. 4 months during which Sophie planned our future while I systematically destroyed it. And then came the night everything fell apart. Sophie had organized a dinner party at our flat, a celebration for a promotion she'd received at work. She'd invited her colleagues, some of my friends, and, of course, Rachel. I hadn't seen Rachel in a social setting with Sophie for weeks. We'd been careful to keep those worlds separate, to maintain the illusion of normalcy in front of the woman we were both betraying. The evening started well enough. Sophie was radiant, glowing with accomplishment, and surrounded by people who loved her. Rachel and I exchanged careful, neutral glances, nothing that would arouse suspicion. I thought we could get through it. I thought we could pretend for one more night. But I hadn't counted on the guilt. Or, more specifically, I hadn't counted on how alcohol amplifies guilt, loosens tongues, and weakens the walls we build to contain our secrets. Rachel had been drinking heavily, more heavily than I'd ever seen her. As the night wore on, she became increasingly agitated, excusing herself frequently, avoiding direct conversation with Sophie. I tried to catch her eye, to signal that she needed to calm down, but she wouldn't look at me. Around midnight, most of the guests had left. It was just the 4 of us, me, Sophie, Rachel, and Sophie's colleague David, who was waiting for a taxi. Sophie was in the kitchen cleaning up. David was on his phone in the living room, and I stepped onto the balcony for some air. Rachel followed me. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice thick with alcohol and emotion. "I can't keep watching you with her, pretending everything is normal." "Not here," I hissed. "Are you insane?" "Maybe I am," she said. "Maybe I've been insane this whole time, thinking you were going to leave her. You said you would. You said Keep your voice down. I could see Sophie through the window just a few feet away. Why? Why should I? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I love you, Marcus. I've loved you for years, since long before you and Sophie got together. Did you know that? She met you first, but I saw you first. And I've been waiting all this time, playing the good friend, watching her have everything I wanted. I didn't know what to say. The scope of Rachel's feelings, the depth of her obsession. It terrified me. This wasn't what I'd signed up for. This wasn't a casual affair. This was something much darker. You need to go home, I said. We'll talk tomorrow. No. Rachel grabbed my arm. We'll talk now. I'm done waiting. Either you tell Sophie, or I will. Panic surged through me. You can't. Rachel, please, you can't. Watch me. She turned toward the door, toward Sophie, and in that moment, I made yet another terrible decision. I grabbed her, tried to stop her, and in the struggle that followed, we both stumbled, crashing against the balcony railing. Sophie appeared in the doorway. The scene she witnessed was damning. Me and Rachel tangled together. Rachel crying. Both of us looking guilty and terrified. Sophie's face went through about 6 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds, before settling on something cold and distant that I'd never seen before. What's going on? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. Nothing, I said, which was possibly the most pathetic lie I'd ever told. Tell her, Rachel said. Tell her, Marcus, or I will. Sophie looked between us, and I watched understanding dawn in her eyes. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough. She always could read people like they were written in large print. Tell me what? She asked. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen. It's my entire life balanced on the edge of a knife. It was Rachel who finally spoke. We've been sleeping together. For months. I'm in love with him. And he's in love with me. And we were going to tell you, but he kept making excuses because he's a coward. The words hung in the air like smoke from a bomb blast. I watched Sophie's face crumple, watched something essential behind her eyes flicker and die. And I knew that nothing I said would ever bring it back. Sophie, I started. Don't. She held up a hand and her whole arm was trembling. Don't you dare. She walked back into the apartment. I heard her say something to David. Can you give us a moment? And then the front door opened and closed. When Sophie came back onto the balcony, she was terrifyingly composed. The tears I expected weren't there. Instead, there was only that cold, distant mask looking at me like I was a stranger. How long? She asked. Sophie, please. How? Long? I couldn't lie. Not anymore. 4 months. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already known. Then she turned to Rachel. You were my best friend. 14 years. I trusted you with everything. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. I never meant... Get out of my house. Rachel looked at me, waiting for me to say something, to defend her, to explain that we were in love and she didn't have to leave. But I was silent, because in that moment, faced with the reality of what I'd done, I realized that I didn't love Rachel. I never had. I'd been using her, using the affair as an escape from problems I'd been too cowardly to address. Rachel left. I never saw her again. Sophie and I stood on that balcony for what felt like hours. She asked questions, and I answered them. Every one with full honesty for the first time in months. Where? When? How many times? Did I use protection? Did I say I loved her? Did I ever mean to tell the truth? Each answer was a wound I inflicted on the woman I claimed to love. Each honest word was a betrayal all over again, forcing her to imagine scenes that would haunt her forever. But she wanted the truth, and after all my lies, it was the least I could give her. When she was finally finished with questions, she went inside, packed a bag, and left. She stayed with a colleague, she told me later. She couldn't bear to be in the space we'd built together, surrounded by memories that now felt like lies. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on our bed, her side cold and empty, and I stared at the ceiling, replaying every mistake, every moment where I could have chosen differently and didn't. The weight of what I'd done was crushing. I'd had everything, and I'd thrown it away for something that meant nothing. The next few weeks were the lowest point of my life. Sophie and I communicated only through texts and occasional phone calls, practical things, logistics, about the apartment, about bills, about separating the life we'd built together. She was never cruel. That's not who Sophie was. But her distance was worse than cruelty. It reminded me with every interaction that I'd lost, not just a lover, but a friend, a partner, a person who'd known me better than I knew myself. I threw myself into work with desperate intensity, trying to drown the guilt in late nights and aggressive deadlines. But guilt doesn't drown. It floats. It bobs to the surface every time you let your guard down, reminding you of exactly who you are and what you've done. About 6 weeks after the revelation, Sophie agreed to meet me for coffee. She wanted closure, she said. She needed to understand why before she could move on. I didn't have good answers for her. I was selfish, didn't feel like enough. I was bored, made me sound like a monster. I thought I could have everything without consequences, was the truth. But it was so pathetic, so small, that I was ashamed to speak it aloud. I told her anyway. I told her about the distance I'd felt in our relationship and how instead of addressing it like an adult, I'd used it as an excuse to betray her trust. I told her about Rachel's kiss in the taxi and how I should have told her that same night. I told her about the slow slide into the affair, the lies I told myself and her, the way I'd rationalized inexcusable behavior until it felt almost normal. Sophie listened without interrupting. When I was finished, she sat silently for a long time, her coffee untouched and growing cold. "You know what the worst part is?" she finally said. "I would have listened. If you come to me 6 months ago and said you were feeling disconnected, that you needed more from our relationship, I would have listened. We could have worked on it together. But you didn't give me that chance. You decided I wasn't worth the effort." She was right. God, she was right. And her words cut deeper than any anger ever could have. "I know I can't undo what I did," I said. "But I want you to know that I'm sorry, not because I got caught. I'm sorry because I hurt you in a way you didn't deserve, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life." Sophie looked at me for a long moment, and something in her expression softened just slightly. Not forgiveness. I didn't deserve that, and we both knew it. But something like acknowledgement. "I believe you're sorry," she said. "But that doesn't change anything. What we had is over, Marcus. You killed it." She was right about that too. We divided our life up over the following weeks. She took things that mattered to her. I kept things that didn't matter to either of us. She moved into her own flat across London, and I stayed in Islington, haunted by her absence in every room. I thought the worst was over. I'd lost Sophie, lost my relationship, lost my self-respect. What else was there to lose? I was about to find out. The affair might have remained a private tragedy, known only to the 3 people directly involved. But Rachel, it turned out, wasn't content to fade quietly into the night. I'd underestimated her. I'd underestimated the depth of her obsession, her capacity for cruelty, and her absolute unwillingness to be the only one who suffered. About 2 months after Sophie left, I started to notice strange things happening at work. Colleagues who'd always been friendly became distant. Meeting invitations that should have included me didn't. My boss, who'd been grooming me for a senior position, suddenly seemed to be looking through me rather than at me. At first, I attributed it to paranoia. Guilt can make you see conspiracies everywhere. But then the rumors reached me directly. A junior colleague, someone who'd always looked up to me, pulled me aside one afternoon. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said, "but people are talking. Something about you having an affair with your girlfriend's best friend. Someone's been emailing around about it." My blood ran cold. Who? She didn't know. The emails had been anonymous, sent from accounts that couldn't be traced. But they were detailed, specific dates, specific locations, enough information that they could only have come from someone who was there. Rachel. I tried to contact her, but she'd blocked me on every platform. Her office said she'd resigned and returned to Dubai. She'd vanished, leaving behind only the grenade she'd thrown into my life. The anonymous emails didn't stop. They expanded. They reached my friends, my family, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one contained a slightly different version of the story, each one painting me as the villain, which, to be fair, I was. But Rachel had weaponized our affair, turned it into a campaign designed to destroy every relationship I had left. My mother called me in tears, asking if it was true. My sister, who'd always been my biggest offender, said she needed time to process. Friends I'd had since university started declining invitations, avoiding my calls. The loneliness that descended was absolute. I'd been stripped of Sophie, of my reputation, of nearly everyone who'd ever cared about me. And the worst part was that I couldn't even be properly angry at Rachel. Yes, she was being vindictive. Yes, her campaign against me was excessive and cruel. But at the core of every horrible email was a truth I couldn't deny. I had done this. I had betrayed Sophie. The consequences I was facing were consequences I had earned. My work performance suffered. How could it not? I was distracted, depressed, barely sleeping. The promotion I'd been promised went to someone else. I was passed over for projects, excluded from client meetings, gradually marginalized in an office where I'd once been a rising star. I considered quitting and starting fresh somewhere else. But running felt like cowardice. And besides, Rachel's campaign had been thorough. My name, when Googled, now came with asterisks and whispers. The marketing industry is smaller than people think. Everyone knows everyone. There was nowhere to run where my history wouldn't eventually follow. I hit bottom on a Thursday night about 4 months after Sophie left. I was sitting alone in my flat, surrounded by empty takeaway containers and unopened mail, staring at my phone and scrolling through photos of a life I'd destroyed. Sophie, smiling at me across a restaurant table. Sophie asleep on a beach in Portugal. Sophie and me at a friend's wedding, looking for all the world like the kind of couple who would last forever. I cried that night, really cried for the first time since childhood. I cried for Sophie, for what I'd done to her. I cried for myself, for the man I used to be and couldn't recognize anymore. I cried for Rachel too, in a strange way, for whatever damage in her had led her to pursue her best friend's boyfriend with such single-minded obsession, for the friendship with Sophie that she'd sacrificed on the altar of a fantasy that was never real. And then, when the tears finally stopped, I made a decision. I couldn't undo what I'd done. I couldn't get Sophie back, couldn't restore my reputation, couldn't rebuild the life I'd destroyed, but I could change. I could become someone who would never make those choices again. I could take responsibility, do the work, and try to become a person I wasn't ashamed of. I started therapy the following week. My therapist was a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Morrison, who had zero tolerance for self-pity, but infinite patience for genuine reflection. She didn't let me off the hook for what I'd done. She made sure I understood the full weight of my choices and their consequences. But she also helped me understand the deeper patterns that had led me there. I had issues with intimacy, she said. When relationships became too comfortable, too safe, I unconsciously sabotaged them. I was terrified of being truly known, of letting someone see all the ugly parts of me. The affair with Rachel wasn't really about Rachel at all. It was about running away from the vulnerability that genuine partnership requires. I also had to confront my relationship with attention and validation. I craved being seen, being desired, being wanted. When Sophie's focus shifted to work and other aspects of her life, I experienced it as abandonment, even though it was perfectly normal and healthy. Instead of communicating my needs like an adult, I sought validation elsewhere, from someone who offered it freely, without the complexity of true intimacy. The work was difficult. There were sessions where I left Dr. Morrison's office feeling worse than when I'd arrived, sessions where I had to look at parts of myself I'd spent years avoiding. But gradually, slowly, I started to change. I rebuilt my relationship with my family. I called my mother weekly, visited my sister monthly, stopped hiding from the people who loved me despite what I'd done. I apologized properly, not to minimize my actions or explain them away, but to fully acknowledge the pain I'd caused. I reached out to friends I'd lost. Not everyone was willing to reconnect, and I respected that. But some were. Some understood that people are capable of terrible things and also capable of change. They gave me second chances I didn't deserve, and I tried every day to earn them. At work, I stopped caring about advancement and started focusing on doing good work. I volunteered for unglamorous projects, helped junior colleagues without expectation of recognition, rebuilt my professional reputation one small act at a time. It took over a year, but eventually I found myself being trusted again, included again, respected again. And throughout all of it, I thought about Sophie. I didn't contact her. She'd made it clear that she needed space, and I owed her that much. But I thought about her constantly, wondered how she was doing, whether she'd moved on, whether she'd found someone who deserved her in a way I never had. I learned through mutual acquaintances that she'd switched companies, taking a bigger role at a competitor firm. I heard she was thriving, that the experience of our relationship ending had somehow catalyzed a period of tremendous personal and professional growth. I was glad. I wanted her to be happy, even if, especially if, it was happiness without me. Nearly 2 years after that terrible night on the balcony, I received an email that made my heart stop. It was from Sophie. The message was short. She'd heard through the grapevine that I'd been doing well, working on myself, making changes. She was glad. She'd been doing a lot of thinking about what happened, about the relationship we'd had, and the way it ended. She wasn't ready to forgive me. She wasn't sure she'd ever be ready for that. But she was ready to talk, if I was willing. I replied within 30 seconds. Yes. Whenever, wherever, however she wanted. We met at a cafe near her new office. She looked different, more confident, more settled, more fully herself than she'd ever been when we were together. She was seeing someone, she told me, a colleague she'd met at her new job. It was early days, but it felt right. She was happy. The news should have devastated me, but it didn't. I was genuinely glad for her. She deserved happiness, deserved someone who would treat her with the respect and honesty I'd failed to provide. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the affair. We'd exhausted that topic long ago. But about everything else. Our lives, our work, our growth. She told me about therapy she'd done to process the betrayal, about anger she'd carried and eventually learned to release. I told her about my own therapy, about the patterns I'd uncovered and the work I was still doing. I'm not going to say I forgive you, she said at the end. I don't know if I can. What you did broke something in me that took a long time to heal. I know, I said. I don't expect forgiveness. But I will say this. She looked at me with those clear, honest eyes that still, after everything, could see straight through me. I believe you've changed. I believe you're not the same person who made those choices. And I'm glad. Not for my sake, but for yours. Living as the person you were, it must have been exhausting. It had been. She was right about that. She was right about so many things. We parted that afternoon with a hug, the first time we'd touched in nearly 2 years. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was closure. The final page of a chapter that should never have been written the way it was. I walked home that evening, feeling something I hadn't felt since before the affair. At peace. Not happy. I wasn't sure I deserved happiness yet. But at peace. The guilt was still there. It would always be there, a permanent scar on my soul. But it was no longer crushing. It was manageable. It was something I could carry while still moving forward. That was a year ago now. I'm 31 years old. I'm still single. I've dated occasionally, but nothing serious. I'm not ready. I'm not sure when I will be. The idea of being in a relationship still feels dangerous, still brings up fears of repeating old patterns. Dr. Morrison says, I'll know when I'm ready. I'm learning to trust that. Sophie and I exchange emails occasionally now. Not regularly, maybe once every few months. We're not friends exactly, but we're not strangers either. We're two people who once loved each other, who were broken by choices I made, and who have somehow found a way to coexist in a world where our history will always connect us. Rachel, I learned, never rebuilt her life the way Sophie and I rebuilt ours. The emails she sent about our affair eventually made their way to Dubai, to her employers, to people who mattered in her industry. Her reputation suffered as much as mine did. Last I heard, she'd left real estate entirely, was working somewhere in Southeast Asia, still running from the consequences of her own obsession. I feel sorry for her sometimes. She destroyed her friendship with Sophie, her career, her life in London, all for an affair that I entered for the wrong reasons and never intended to lead anywhere. She believed I loved her. I let her believe it because it was convenient, because it made me feel powerful, because I was too cowardly to face the truth. In some ways, I failed Rachel as profoundly as I failed Sophie. Not in the same way. She made her own choices, and she's responsible for them. But I was never honest with her about what our relationship was or wasn't. I used her, and when things fell apart, I abandoned her without a second thought. That's something I carry too. I think about all of this, often. The chain of choices that led from a kiss in a taxi to the destruction of 3 lives. The moments where I could have turned back, but didn't. The lies I told and the lies I believed. The person I was and the person I'm trying to become. What I've learned, what I want anyone listening to this to understand, is that betrayal doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in 1,000 small moments. 1,000 tiny decisions to prioritize yourself over the people you claim to love. Every time I chose not to address problems in my relationship with Sophie, I was setting the stage for betrayal. Every time I let Rachel's attention flatter me instead of recognizing it as dangerous, I was taking another step toward the cliff. Every time I told myself that what I was doing was somehow justified, somehow understandable, somehow excusable, I was betraying not just Sophie, but myself. The affair itself was just the final act of a play I'd been staging for months. The writing was on the wall long before I slept with Rachel. I just refused to read it. If there's one thing I want anyone to take from my story, it's this. The time to act is before the betrayal, not after. When you feel distance growing in your relationship, address it. When you find yourself attracted to someone outside your partnership, examine why. And then step back, set boundaries, protect what you have. When the voice in your head starts rationalizing behavior you know is wrong, listen to the part of you that knows better. Because once you cross certain lines, you can't uncross them. You can do the work, make changes, become a better person, but you can never undo the pain you caused. That pain lives on, the permanent resident in the heart of someone who trusted you. You have to carry it with you for the rest of your life. I carry Sophie's pain every day. I see it when I close my eyes, hear it in the silence of my empty apartment, feel it in moments that should be happy, but are always shadowed by the knowledge of what I'm capable of. It's not a punishment. It's a reminder of who I was and who I never want to be again. Some days, the weight of that reminder feels unbearable. But then, I remember that Sophie carries it too, and that unlike me, she didn't choose it. She trusted someone who turned out to be unworthy of trust. She loved someone who was incapable of loving her properly. She gave years of her life to a relationship that ended in humiliation and betrayal. If she can carry that weight and still build a good life, still be happy, still trust again, then the least I can do is carry my part without complaint. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because silence felt like one more act of cowardice, and I'm done being a coward. I'm telling it because somewhere, someone is standing where I stood 3 years ago, at the beginning of an affair that will destroy everything they claim to love. Maybe hearing my story will stop them. Maybe it won't. But at least I'll have tried. I cheated on my girlfriend with her best friend. I regret it more than words can express. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become the kind of person who would never make that choice again. That's my confession. Make of it what you will. The apartment is quiet tonight. London glitters outside my window, indifferent to my guilt and my growth and my ongoing attempts at redemption. Somewhere across the city, Sophie is probably having dinner with the colleague she's dating, laughing about something I'll never hear, building a life I'll never be part of. I'm glad for her. Genuinely, completely glad. And I'm still here, still working, still becoming. Not because I deserve happiness. I'm not sure I do. But because the alternative is given up. And I've done enough damage by taking the easy way out. The hard way is all I have left. Tomorrow, I have a therapy session with Dr. Morrison. We're going to talk about vulnerability, about my fear of being truly seen. We're going to dig into the parts of myself I've spent decades avoiding. It will be uncomfortable and exhausting and absolutely necessary. After that, I'm having coffee with my sister. She's forgiven me, or at least she's working on it. We're closer now than we've been since childhood. The crisis I created in my life somehow rebuilt bridges I didn't even know were broken. And in the evening, I'm going to the gym. Not because I care about fitness, but because physical exhaustion helps quiet the mental noise. When my body's tired, my mind stops replaying scenes from that terrible night, stops showing me Sophie's face when she realized what I'd done. Small steps. Every day. That's all I can offer. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. If I'd told Sophie about Rachel's kiss that first night. If I'd gone to couples therapy when our relationship started feeling distant. If I'd never answered Rachel's texts, never met her for coffee, never walked into her flat that night knowing exactly what would happen. But wondering is pointless. The past is written. All I can control is the future. And in my future, I'm choosing honesty, choosing vulnerability, choosing to face the hard conversations instead of running from them, choosing to be someone who, if given the chance, would deserve the kind of love I once had with Sophie. Will I ever find that love again? I don't know. Maybe I will, and maybe I'll get it right the second time. Maybe I'll spend the rest of my life alone, which would also be a kind of justice. Either way, I'll face it honestly. No more lies, no more running. Just the truth, however hard. Just the work, however endless. Just the hope, however fragile. that somewhere on the other side of all this regret, there's a version of me worth becoming. I never thought I'd be the villain of my own story. But I was. I am. And I'm trying every day to write a different ending. That's all any of us can do. I put down my phone now and look around this apartment. These rooms that used to echo with Sophie's laughter, that now hold only my silence and my memories. Tomorrow will come, as it always does. There will be work and therapy and small interactions with a world that's slowly, cautiously letting me back in. And there will be this, the permanent awareness that I am capable of terrible things. That the line between good person and bad person is thinner than I ever wanted to believe. That crossing it is easier than anyone imagines. And coming back is harder than anyone can know until they've tried. I cheated on my girlfriend with her best friend. I regret it with every fiber of my being. And I'm living with that regret, learning from it, trying to transform it into something that might someday mean something. This is my confession. I'm sorry.